Okay, there we go. I think we're started. Doing all right today?
Yep.
Ah, very good. Any questions before we get started? Okay. First lab's due by midnight tonight? Okay. I haven't checked to see who's turned it in or not. So
I was going to work on that today.
there you go. All right. Got a plan, just so long as you remember. All right. So when we left off last week, we had been working in the Rails console looking at ActiveRecord objects. We had basically seen how we could create an ActiveRecord class, which Rails then recognizes, lets us create ActiveRecord models. So you remember we were working with books specifically. We had looked at several different ways that we could create new instances of an ActiveRecord object. We could use the new method, kind of the standard constructor way, and then manually fill the object with different values. We could use the new method. We could pass it a hash of values. There was a create method that we saw that we could use, which not only made the new object, but also went ahead and saved it. And then I think we had spent most of the time last week talking about finder methods of various sorts. We'd looked at the find method itself that lets us look up, find, locate, retrieve, whatever you want to call it, an ActiveRecord object in a huge number of variety of different ways. We could look things up by ID. We could look things up by any of their individual attributes, like pulling up a book based on its page count or its title or its author. And then we had rolled into playing with the where method that every ActiveRecord object has, which gives us a lot more flexibility in what it is that in how it is that we're able to actually retrieve data. So let's see. I guess to get started, let me go ahead and jump back into the console again. So I'm already over here in my project. I'm going to go ahead and start up my console. There we go. And you remember we have the book class. All right. So we saw that we could do things like book find, and we could give it a number. Oops. I guess I don't have a object with an ID of 5. Not quite enough books yet. How about book 3? There we go. Oh yeah, we had also talked about customizing the console a little bit to make it a little bit easier to deal with. We'd used the HIRB gem. Forgot about that. Okay.
Is it up on the website?
I think my .irbrc file is listed out there. So yeah, should be available. Okay. So we had started playing with the where method, or I think basically where we left off is that we had been playing with the where method that lets us put together all kinds of interesting little queries. So we could do things like say where the author is like, not percent, dollar? No, question mark. What language am I in? And then we could say, let's see, percent singer percent. There we go. Retrieve all the books where the author is like some string I provide. I think that's pretty much where we had left off. Sound familiar? Okay, very, very good. All right, besides the find and the where method that we've looked at previously, there are other methods that we can use on ActiveRecord classes and objects, which also can be real handy. Another one that's very simple but quite useful is the order method. Right? The order method lets us determine the order that results will be returned in. You might notice that if I just say book.all, right, the order that the books actually naturally get returned in is based on the ID. They're returned in order of their IDs. So we end up getting book ID 1, 2, and then 3, and then 4. Right? But if we wanted to retrieve books in any other particular order, the order method would actually let us do that. So for example, if I said book.order by title, passing the title as a symbol, right? Excuse me, the books aren't coming back in ID order anymore. If you do look at the IDs, you see now they're coming back 3, 4, 2, 1. But if you look at the actual titles, they're being listed out alphabetically by title for us. Okay? The way it naturally sorts when you just provide a column that you want it to order by is always in ascending order. So it went from beginning of the alphabet to the end of the alphabet, actually, essentially, L before R. Right? If we wanted it to go the other way, that is also possible. Right? What we could do is instead of passing what we want it to sort by as a symbol, we could instead pass in a string with the column that we want it to be sorted by, but we could also then specify descending, DESC. Right? So again, I get the books back, but this time they're in descending order based on the title. So we've got T, R, L, and L, kind of the opposite order of what we had before. right? Still not quite an ID order, 1, 2, 4, 3, which is good. Pretty sure I didn't make a mistake that way. Okay? So easy enough. The order method is not terribly complicated. Right? If I said book order by page count, then all of the results that are returned are ordered by page count, again, ascending order, lowest number of pages to highest number of pages. And if I would rather have it go the other direction, descending order, then again, it's just a matter of using a string instead of a symbol and telling it specifically to do descending order. So now, highest number of pages to lowest. Yeah? Can be handy for doing a number of different things. Obviously, if we were working with a bunch of books and we simply wanted to provide them in some sort of sane order for the user's benefit, alphabetically by title or alphabetically by author or something like that, then order certainly can be handy for those kinds of situations. It can also be handy for other types of things, though. Like what if, for example, I wanted to find which book has the highest number of pages? Which book has the most pages in it? Hmm? What I could do for something like that is I could say, put the books into order, right, where the page count is descending, like I did a second ago. Okay? But then instead of getting back all the books, I could specifically ask for the first one. And if they're descending by page count, then the first in that order should be the book that has the absolute most pages. Right? I could do .last instead at the end of that statement so that I could get the book with the least number of pages. Or if I did book.order, simply order by page count, right, which is going to be least to greatest. If I were to ask for the first from that set, that would be the book with the least number of pages as well. So as in most everything, lots of different potential ways to make all these things work. Excuse me. The order method can also be chained together with other methods. So like the where method that we've been using. Excuse me. This weather's got me all gummed up. I can't talk very well. We can chain the order method along with other methods, like the where method, for example. Right? If I wanted to find all the, well, let's see, what do I want to find? Oops, can't do that. If I look at all my books again, let me see what I have to work with. What if I wanted to find all the books that had less than 100 pages, and I wanted them to be put into ascending order? Right? I could say find books where page count is less than 100. Right? And by itself, that gives me back all the books that have less than 100 pages in it. But if I then chained onto that, put them into order by page count, right, then I get back the same two books, but now they're being put into a specific order. So essentially what happens is when I use the where method, it's returning a set of books that match the criteria that it was given. Right? That set of books that was returned then recognizes and can use the order method. So we call the order method on that set and basically provide another layer of processing for those objects. So we end up not only getting the specific books back that we want, but also customized in the order that we might be looking for.
Did you do the order, like do it by page count, so just do order by anything? So do it have to be page count?
No, yeah, you can order by just about anything. I was ordering by title before, ordered by page count. Here, if I am looking for books that have less than 100 pages and maybe I want to put them into order based alphabetically on the name of the author, I could do that. So Noah Singer comes before test author. Any data that happens to be present in the objects that you want to have it sort by, you can do it, most certainly. Not too bad. Couple of other quick little methods that can kind of go along with this. Right? There's a method called limit and a method called offset. You can use the limit method to specify how many results you want returned. Right? So I don't have very many results. I don't have very many books, I guess I should say. But I could say, show me all the books where what? let me just use page count again, where page count is greater than 5, that's essentially going to be all my books. I'm really just kind of putting that in to demonstrate that you can, right? And then if I said limit the results to 1, right, I only get the first book back. Okay, could have ordered in there as well, I guess, if we had wanted. Order by page count, limit by 1. That would be potentially another way that I could get the book with the fewest number of pages, as long as the number of pages is greater than 5, is the condition I put in. So any books with less than 5 pages we won't see. Any that have more than 5 pages will be put into page count order, and we only want the first one, so we can just say limit 1, right? Or 2 or 3. You can, of course, limit any number that's appropriate for whatever it is you're trying to do. So there's a limit of 2. So the first 2 books, based on that order and criteria. Offset is similar to that as well. Right? If I said, give me all the books that have a page count greater than 5, put into page count order, limit 1, but then I also said offset the results by 2. What it actually will do, because of the offset then, is jump forward 2 in the ordering, right, in the list of books that we have to work with at that point, and then still just give us 1 book back. This can potentially be useful if we're doing things like just retrieving objects in groups. If we don't need or don't want to retrieve all of the objects of a type, say our system has 10,000 books in them, but we don't actually want all 10,000 books to work with at a particular moment. We only want 20, right? We could say limit 20, right? So we only get 20 books back at a time. But every time we want the next group of 20, we could set offset to multiples of 20. So we could start off with offset set to 0 to get the first 20 books. Right? Then we could set offset to 20, limit 20 to get the next 20 books, then offset set to 40, and so on and so forth. Put that whole thing together. And essentially what we have is a way of sort of paging through the data. So we could have pagefuls, if you want to think of it that way, of data to work with instead of having to work with the entire potentially very large data set all at the same time. Right? Limit and offset, though, that's about all they do. Nothing too much with those. Okay. Another method we have besides the ones we've talked about, so far we've got what? Where, or find, where, order, limit, and offset. About 5 of them so far. Another one we can throw into that batch is there's a method called select. Okay. Now typically, whenever we ask for books, what we get back is all of the data dealing with the books, right? Every single bit of it. Every piece of data that's stored in the database about a book is what ends up being in the result set that gets given back to us, right? Sometimes that's fine. It all kinds of depends on the data itself, but there may potentially be certain situations where we don't want all of the data. Situations where we don't want all of the data we could run into for efficiency's sake, for optimization's sake. If there's particular pieces of data, especially that may be extremely large, or that simply aren't needed at a particular time, we might specifically ask ActiveRecord to not give us back those particular pieces of data. Situation that jumps to mind is, what if in our books we had a binary blob that was actually a image of the cover of the book, right? That would be an interesting thing to have the actual cover of the book as an image, as binary, stored in a field in the database for each book. But if we're ever doing anything with books and we don't specifically need that binary data, it would be a wonderful increased performance if we could filter it out and not have it returned to us every time, right? So ActiveRecord gives us a method called select that we can use for selecting the particular pieces of data that we actually want. If I say book select title, right, then instead of getting back all of the data for every book, all I get back is the titles of the book. If I were putting together a page or navigation or something along those lines and that was the only detail I needed, then why retrieve all the rest of that data? Just get the data that's important, right? Usually we would want more than just one record. Often having the ID in there as well will be a very handy thing to have, right? I'm trying to remember, if we want 2 things, do we just comma separate them? Yeah, that's it. So if I say book.select as a string ID comma title, then I get back the ID of the book and its individual title, which would be more than enough to probably be able to create a hyperlink to it or something like that. If none of the other details are important, then why spend the clock cycles retrieving them from the database? Right? So pretty simple to do. Not a whole lot there. I'm trying to remember, can we do those as symbols? Nope. Looks like it's got to be a string. It's just expecting one argument. I can't provide two. So when I use select, apparently I have to give it a string to tell it exactly what it is that I'm wanting. So book.select, publisher, and author. Let me throw the ID in there as well. There we go. So a limited data set actually getting returned. Okay. Another one of the neat things you can do with select, excuse me, is that you can actually use it to manufacture new information, potentially. Right? If you look at the SQL query that select is actually writing, more or less what select is letting you do is to put in the, what do they call it in SQL? I can't remember right now. The selection criteria that comes immediately after the select keyword. So normally we'd be doing something like select star, get all data. But here when we start using the select method, we end up doing select and then just specifically the different parts and pieces that we've asked for. Right? In that particular part of the SQL statement is also where we can sometimes use some of the built-in SQL functions, things like sum and count, that let us actually perform some simple calculations on the data that's being retrieved by the query. Right? So that we essentially have the ability to be able to manufacture new data that itself is not actually present in the database. So if I wanted to do something like count how many books were in the database, for example, right? If I said book.select and I said, let's say, count the IDs as total. The count the IDs as total gets substituted into the query that gets written. Right? It retrieves all the books essentially, sort of internally, counts how many different IDs it can find, right? And then takes that new value that's created, the count itself, and refers to it as total. So since that's what I asked to have selected, what I actually end up getting back is a single column with a single value. The column's called total, and its value is how many different IDs were counted. Basically, how many total books there are. Right? Just out of curiosity, if I do just book.count, a little built-in shortcut that does essentially the same sort of thing for me. Right? The only big difference is it doesn't specifically refer to that counted value by a name, like before where I had said call the count total. Right? And it seems to sort of internally, instead of returning it as an active relation, basically as an active record type object in a way, it goes ahead and turns it into just a pure value 4 and just returns that integer, that number. Right? But gives me basically the same sort of thing. Okay. Let's see, combining this together with other things, what if we did something like book.where, let's say where the, oops. Let me start again. Where the publisher is Singer Publishing, I think is what I called it. Yeah, that gives me back 2 books. Right? If I wanted to know how many books there were from Singer Publishing, I could throw onto the end of that, chain onto the end of that a select, where I then say count the IDs in that result set as whatever. I'll just say as total again. So I know that at that point I have 2 books by that particular publisher. It's pretty creative stuff you can put together, manipulate the data a bit, and get to see exactly whatever it is that you want to see. Trying to remember the books I have again. What if I wanted to know how many books were written by somebody who had Bird in their name? Book where author is like bird. Okay. And then from that data, select a count of the IDs as total. Uh-oh. Got nothing.
Is it case sensitive?
That's what I was just thinking. If I give it a capital B in bird, will it make a difference? That time we got an error. Oh, I see the problem. I left the closing quote off the value after the bird percent sign. Let me go back to this one. There we go. So a total of one book where the author has bird in their name. Not too bad. So that's the select method. Let's see. I don't have any duplicate authors, do I? Yeah, I do. We could use that, right? What if we wanted to know the total number of pages in all of the books from Singer Publishing? Total number of pages in all of the books by Singer Publishing. Well, we could say book where publisher is Singer Publishing. That'll give us back all the books from that publisher. And then we could select from there. And this time we could sum the page count column as total pages. That seemed to do the trick. 987 plus 7 gives us 994. I think that's right. So, lots of fun to be had with the select method. Okay.
Is there even more online than what you've shown?
Yeah, always. Always more online than what I show. I can't get into every tiny little thing.
Do you use the IRB a lot?
Yeah, quite a bit.
What select functions you use the most?
Say that again?
What select functions you use the most?
Oh, usually just to limit the data that's returned. It's usually nothing too terribly fancy. If on a particular page I'm putting together a little sidebar that has a summary of shortcuts to other parts of the website, and I don't really need every detail about whatever it is I'm shortcutting to, I'm going to use select in there to only pull out the specific data that's necessary. Yeah, and the ID. Always want to have the ID for the most part. Okay. I think, as far as just sort of retrieving and manipulating data goes, one more method to mention called group, to group results back together. I wonder if we have anything good that will even demonstrate this. I really feel like I need to add another book or two. Let me go ahead and do that. Let me say book.create. Let's make a new book that has a title of something. Learning computers. Let's give it an author of Pretty Bird Feeder. Quotes in there would have been a good idea. There we go. Let me give it an ISBN of that. Give it a page count of that. A publisher of Addison, quote again, Addison Wesley, W-S-L-E-Y. I hope is how I spelled it last time, otherwise this will all be for naught. Okay. Hit the enter key there. It looks like it created my new book, inserted all the data, and went ahead and saved it for me because I used the create method. So that seemed to work okay. So we've got an additional book in there now that we didn't have before. Excuse me. All right, if I look at all my books, I have 2 books from Singer Publishing, 2 books from Addison Wesley. Right? I'd like to see those publishers and make sure I spelled everything right. Let me say book select publisher, just so I can see it. Did I spell Addison Wesley the same both times? Yeah, looks like I did. Okay, good. So 2 books by Singer Publishing, 2 books by Addison Wesley. Now, this last retrieval type method is called group. Okay. What it lets us do is specify a parameter, a attribute, to have the data grouped by. So if I say group by publisher, this is what I end up getting back. Excuse me. Right. A little bit odd, because essentially what this return did was it ended up leaving out 2 of the books, the second book by Addison Wesley, the second book by Singer Publishing. But what it was trying to do, what it was essentially attempting to do, was to group together similar publisher results. So essentially, once a publisher was shown, that publisher won't be shown again. Right? The useful thing in that would be that if I wanted to get a list of unique publishers, right? If I did book select publisher, right, then there's going to end up being duplicates because I'm getting every publisher all of the time. Right? But if I said select the publisher and group by publisher, right, then the listing becomes unique. Each publisher will only be listed a single time. Okay. If I wanted to at that point, I could also have it do things like count how many books there are for each publisher. So I could say, give me back the publisher and give me back a count of everything as, what do I want to call it, number of books. There we go, kind of like that. So I can see how many books I actually have in the database from each individual publisher, right, with the listing grouped as publisher, grouped by publisher. So group can occasionally be a handy one too for making results unique, sort of summing things up, is how I think about it a lot of times. Yeah? Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Yeah, we should just stop there. There's no topping that. That's just great. We can just forget about everything else. That's all we need.
That's up there with you doing a whole PHP semester in 5 seconds.
Did I do that?
Yeah. You showed us Rails.
Oh, yeah, that's a dirty trick. Yeah, last day of a PHP class. That's perfect time for a Rails demo to catch people's attention. Yeah, most definitely. Okay, all right. Let's say, kind of moving on here. Let's say that I need to retrieve the oldest books. I want to be able to retrieve the oldest books in our database. Okay. What would that mean?
Sort by and created.
Probably want to sort by created on, or is it created at? I always forget. Created, well, it's definitely created something. Is there on or at the end of it? I want to say it's at. Yeah. Let's say select created at. Yeah, created at is what it's called, right? So basically we could retrieve all of our books, no where clause, we'll just get all the books. Right? We could order them by created at. Right? If we want the oldest, then we would sort in ascending order, which I think would be oldest to newest, and we could limit the results to 3. Right? That should give us the 3 oldest books. What do we have in there? We've got a book that was created on the 22nd, then 3 books that were created on the 24th. Right? One at 7:49, one at 11:22, one at 13:13. So basically, what we should get back. Wait, is that right? Yeah. What we should get back is we should get back the book that was created on the 2nd, and then the 2 books that were created on the 24th at 49 and at 22 seconds. Wouldn't that be the 3 oldest? Okay, if I'm reading it right. So let's see if it works. If I say book.order by created at, limit to 3. Are those the 3 right books? Kind of hard to tell there, isn't it? Yeah, it should have been automatically been descending. Yeah, I think those are the 3 books I wanted. I did the select created at on there just so I could see the created at value a little bit more clearly in the console to be able to figure out if that's right. But I think that's right, right? So the 3 books, basically, the 3 oldest books are Test Book, Ruby, Faux something, and Learning something by me, right? Now, what if that particular ability, the ability to retrieve what we're calling the oldest books, what if that's something that we needed to do throughout an application? There were multiple different places in the application that we were writing where we needed to be able to get the oldest books. Maybe there's also the potential that how many books we want in the list of oldest books is something that the bosses regularly change. One week it's 3 books, the next week it's 5. Around Christmas time, maybe they show the 10 oldest books. Right? What we would want to do is we would want to be careful where we actually write an active record statement like this, where we do this order and limit business. Because if we end up repeating that retrieval statement multiple places throughout the application, then obviously we're not doing a very good job of keeping our application dry. Right? We're repeating ourselves all over the place. And that, of course, is going to make it difficult for us to debug, make it difficult for us to update when management says, let's make the oldest book list 10 books this week. Right? We would have to hunt down everywhere we typed in that statement into our application so that we could update the limit to 10. Right? So what it would make more sense to do would be to see if we could actually come up with a way to store that particular ability in a single location where it could then be utilized anywhere. Right? Essentially, what it would be nice if I could do is it would be nice if I could do something like, say, book.oldest, and have it understand that when I say that, what I mean is order the books by when they were created in ascending order, right? And give us back 3 in this particular case. If I try that right now, of course, I get an error, right? Because the book class does not at the moment understand a method called oldest. There is no such method, right? But that's where this wonderful little file that was put together for us over in our project comes into play. When we first created our book active record object, one of the things that the generator built for us was this little book class. It's in the models directory under our app directory. Right? It inherits from active record base, which is where we get all of the abilities that we've been working with up to this point. But since this is just really a Ruby class, there's absolutely nothing in the world to stop us from coming in here and adding new abilities or modifying the class, potentially in some substantial ways. So if I came in here and, for example, put in a method called self.oldest, right? Self because I want it to be a class method. I want to be able to say book.oldest, right? Book specifically, the book class. If I put that in, then that basically means that I have the ability then to create new abilities in this active record object that go beyond what active record gives the object itself. Right? If I just leave the method blank like I have here, we should at least be able to test it out. If I go back over to the console and I try book.oldest again, you see I still get an error. It's still telling me there's no such thing as a method oldest. Right? The reason for that, though, is that the console does not dynamically reload your classes every time you make a change to them. Right? So essentially the console here is still working with the book class the way the book class was when I first started the console. It's not seeing these new changes to the book class that I just added to it. So one of the things I'm going to have to do here whenever I make a change is there is a method I can call in the console called reload ! Right? When I call that, it's going to go out, reread all the classes, basically sort of reload the environment in a way. Okay? So if I then say book.oldest, now it recognizes it, so no error. Of course, the method is blank. It doesn't return anything, so nil is what we see as its value. Okay? But calling that reload ! Method is something we have to remember to do whenever we make a change to the model class so that those changes will then be recognized inside the console. Okay? Seems like it wasn't that long ago I think it was a blog post somebody had written about a trick you could add. I think it was to the IRBRC file, where you could get console 2 automatically reload. I'll have to see if I can track that blog post down, post it somewhere so you guys can find it. You guy can find it. Only one person here today. Okay, so anyway, over here with the oldest method, what I can essentially do with it at that point is recreate what I had been doing sort of manually by typing out the order and the limit method calls. Except here, since we're inside the ActiveRecord object itself, I don't have to say book dot. Right? I can just say order by created at, right? And limit to 3. Right. Since this is happening inside a class method, self.oldest, it'll be understood that this is actually being called on this, or I'm sorry, on self, like that, even if I don't specifically put self there. Right. So it'll be called on the class just like we were doing in the console. So back over in the console, if I again reload, so those changes are seen, and then try my oldest method again, there's our 3 oldest books.
You also set it to where it gets user input from the console.
Yeah, but there's just not a whole lot of reason to. Since we're not probably going to be doing all that much heavy interaction with the Rails stack through the console is more there for us to sort of check up on things, make little changes every once in a while here or there. I don't recall seeing anybody purposefully make a model where it would prompt for information from the console, because it's just not going to be used that way too terribly often. It's not meant to be a procedural program, really. Yeah. All right. So that's kind of a neat little ability as far as drawing up our apps go. Right? We can add any common selection criteria, retrieval criteria that we happen to use fairly frequently. We can turn those things into actual class methods in our ActiveRecord objects classes, like book, for example, right? So that they're always there sort of at our beck and call. They're only located in one place, so it makes them easy to update if anything has to be changed with them. Overall, it's pretty good stuff. Right. So we'll do some more of that as we keep going through some of these things. Right. But with that ability introduced, let's go ahead and go over and talk a little bit about updating records. That's something we haven't done yet. We can create new books. We can save books when they're created, of course. We can retrieve books in dozens of different ways. What about actually updating values that are stored inside a book? Right? For example, way back at the beginning, I created that test book, which has kind of been sitting there sticking out like a sore thumb, missing an ISBN, missing a publisher. Right? I could turn that book into actually something more realistic if I wanted to by updating it. Basically keeping the record, right? So the ID will never actually change. But we could go in, swap out any of the different values that we might want to with that particular record. Right? If we wanted to update that book, the very first thing we would need to do is we would need to retrieve the book itself, actually get the book essentially into a variable so that we would then have the ability to be able to refer to it. Right? So if I said something like book b equals book.first, that would be a quick, easy way to grab that one particular book. Okay. Or, of course, I could do something like book.find, the book that has an ID of 1. That would retrieve it as well. Or I could get much more complicated. I could say retrieve the book whose title is test book, or retrieve the book that was created before this particular date, or any of those different things that we've been talking about. I'll go ahead and just say book.find1. Nice and unambiguous way to retrieve that book. Right? So at that point in my variable b, I have a reference to that actual object, where if I then wanted to be able to manipulate it, I of course could. If I wanted to give it a better title, right, I could call this the testing book, a book about testing. Right? If I take a look at the object b, right, I see testing book is in there as its title now. Right? If I actually go to book.all and take a look though, when I do book.all, which kind of gives me a fresh set of data back from the database, I can see that in the database that book's title is still just test book. Right? So in addition to actually retrieving and updating the object itself, we'll also have to resave it. So if I say b.save, it actually updates at that point the value that's stored in the database for the title of that particular book. And now if I take a look at all my books, I can see that the title has actually been updated. Good. So the way we just updated that book was basically what, like a 3-step process? Retrieve the book, make the actual change to the data, and then resave the book. Right? Rails does have some sort of convenience methods, ActiveRecord I should say, does have some convenient methods in it that we can use to make updates a little bit quicker, a little bit easier. Right? Certainly one of those methods is called the update attributes method. I still have my object B here. Right? So let's say I wanted to update the author and the ISBN. Okay? What I could do is I could say b.update attributes. Okay. With update attributes, essentially what I can do is I can give it in sort of a hash style syntax the names of the pieces of data that I want to update and the new values that I want to put in. So let me say I want to set the author to Victrola Firecracker. And let's say that I want to set the ISBN to that number. When I hit the Enter key, okay, we can see from the SQL that gets spit out that it actually updated the database itself. So using update attributes as opposed to the way we did it the first time, treating it more of just sort of like a pure Ruby object, update attributes saves us a step. Right? To use update attributes, we still have to retrieve the record that we want to update. We still have to, of course, perform the update itself, but we don't have to call save. Right? The first way we did it, there was that third step of always having to call save. When we use the update attributes method, it automatically saves, essentially. So if I say book.all at that point, excuse me, the author and the ISBN have indeed been updated.
You also, update each one individually, go through and do something like book.title equals so-and-so, where ID equals ID.
Oh.
Kind of like doing it in like an SQL way.
Kind of combine them together. Combine together a select and or a retrieval and an update. Yeah. You could do that. Let's say book.find the ID of 1, right? And then we could update attributes right there. We could, yeah. When we do the find or the where or whatever it happens to be, right? If we get a book back, we could just immediately at that point call update attributes on it. The only trick would be is if the find or the where or whatever we do retrieves multiple values, then we would actually need to loop through the result set that comes back and call update attributes individually on each one of the results, each one of the individual books. But if it's just one book, we should be able to do that. All right, so I've still got B there. The only thing B is missing at this point is it doesn't actually have a publisher. I was saving publisher to show you one other method. There's a method called update attribute, no S on the end of it. Right? With update attributes, you can update as many or as few attributes as you would like. With update attribute, you can only update one. With update attribute, what you do is you give it as a symbol the field that you want to update, so publisher. As a second value, you tell it who the publisher should be. Let me set it to somebody else. Lambda Corp. There we go. Like update attributes, right? Update attribute automatically saves. Right? So retrieve the object, call update attribute to change a value that's stored in it, and then no need to call save after that. The save basically happens automatically when you call update attribute. Right? Update attributes, the plural form and the singular form, update attribute, are really pretty much the same thing. They kind of walk on each other a little bit. There's nothing you can do with update attribute, the singular one, that you couldn't do pretty much just as easily with update attributes, the plural one. The plural one, though, would cost you an extra letter. You have to put the S on the end of the method call. And if I remember, I read recently, I think in Rails 4, update attribute, the singular one, I'm pretty sure is going away. I think they're going to deprecate the singular version, the update attribute, and just keep update attributes, because there's just not enough difference between them to really warrant both of their existence, which I can certainly understand. I mean, I never really use update attribute that much when update attributes is so easy, right? The only difference would be if I was going to do the same thing, I'd write it like that. So I've got to have the extra S on there, right? And then I give it the values as the hash style form, right, instead of as two separate arguments. But overall, looking at those two lines, it looks like they pretty much came out equal. Considering you don't need the comma anymore, I think that makes up for the addition of the S, and it ends up being the exact same number of keystrokes. But the update attributes plural version, right, is nice because we could use it to update a bunch of attributes if we wanted, whereas the other one can only do one at a time. Right? Potentially one line of code versus many. So that's nice. Okay. I already did that. There was actually no change to be performed. It recognized that and didn't actually bother to do any database access. Kind of interesting. Okay. Let's see. How we doing? Let's play with some of this stuff a little bit. Let's add a new column to our books. Let's give our books a new piece of data that they don't currently have. Okay? Right now, a book is an ID, a title, an author, an ISBN, a page count, a publisher, created at, and updated at. All well and good. Let's say we need another attribute in there that we're going to use to keep track of whether a book is in stock or not. What I'm going to do is I'm going to get out of the console. Okay? And to actually make a substantial change to an object, to an ActiveRecord object, I need the change to be recognized and placed into the database for me. I could, of course, go to the database myself, do an update table type statement, right? But, of course, then we would have the problem that if anybody else was working on this project, or if I needed to take this project and switch it to another machine, I would have to remember to, again, go back in, do that manual change. So really what would be much better if I want to make a change to my book, how they actually are stored in the database, the book table, it would be better to let Rails do it for me. That way it'll store a record of the fact that that change has been made, and will be able to automatically replay it again for me in the future if it happens to need to. So essentially what I want to do is I want to create a new migration. So I'm going to say Rails G migration, Rails generate a new migration. We'll talk more about migrations later, right? But we've talked a little bit about what they are. Basically just step-by-step changes to a database that's happening. Right? Excuse me. I'm going to call this new migration add in stock to books. Okay. And what I essentially wanted to do is I wanted to create a new column in the database called in stock that's going to be a Boolean. Right. So adding a new column to my books table in the database called in stock that'll store a Boolean value. Right. I hit the enter key. It generates a new migration file for me. Right. Like I said, we'll talk more about migrations later, but essentially, if I go look at the little file that was generated, which is under the migrate directory, under the DB directory in my project, I can see that what it did was it created this little Ruby class that has a single method in it called change. And in that change method, what it's doing is calling a method called add column. And this is the part I think is really neat. It's adding a new column called in stock, and the data type is going to be Boolean. Well, that's obvious. Of course it is. That's specifically what I asked for. But the part I think is neat is that it knows that it's supposed to be added to the books table. Right? This bit that I added here when I wrote that migration statement, where I was kind of giving the migration a name, right? It was actually smart enough to look at it and figure out that books there at the end of it was the name of one of my tables, and that obviously must be the table that I wanted to modify. So, pretty clever. Okay. Now that I actually have that migration to actually apply it, I'm going to do rake db migrate, colon in there, db colon migrate. Okay. That'll actually run that Ruby class, call that change method, which then goes in and adds that new column to my books table. So my books now should have a in-stock attribute, right? Stored in the database and available in the objects themselves. Let's see if it worked. Let me go back into the console again. There we go. If I take a look at all my books, over there on the far right, sure enough, we've got a new attribute in all of our books called in stock. Not too bad, huh? Works for me. That's about how much SQL I like to write. Right at 0 is typically best. Okay.
Is it possible, like, I remember you had to add like letters and stock, not to add one boolean value to all of them at once?
Oh, we could just write a little statement here in the console to kind of pre-initialize them all. Yeah, we could do that. Also, through the database, we could have gone through and had it set a default value, depending on how the database was set up. Oh yeah, we're having class. What can I do for you?
Can I get the lecture online? I have to go because my daughter's in the hospital.
Oh.
So I won't be here for my class in an hour or two.
When you get back, see if you can get a copy of notes from somebody.
Is that fine?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
just want to give you the heads up. I didn't want to just.
Don't know. I appreciate it. That's fine. You should.
Really do apologize.
You should go. All right. Yikes. Hate hearing stuff like that. Kids in the hospital. There's hardly anything sadder, right? But anyway, yeah. If we wanted to go ahead and go through and initialize the value of in stock, maybe we want to, for example, have all the books start off showing that they are in stock, right? And then once we have a value at all those fields, we could then start manipulating it back and forth as books are bought and sold. We could basically say book.find all, right? And then for each one of our books, we could just pass it a block. Oops. For each one of the individual books that we get in that result set that comes back, we could then go through and for that particular book, we could update attributes. And we could set in stock to true. Just good old Ruby stuff. Just working with regular old Ruby objects for the most part. The fact that this is actually going to go in, write a bunch of SQL, and update our database for us is not exactly irrelevant, but not all that much of a concern. Yeah. I hit the enter key. I think I did something wrong. Ah, yeah, that's good. That's good. I was hoping I would run into that in here somewhere. Yeah. The root of that problem appears to be an active model mass assignment security error. Can't mass assign protected attribute in stock. I was hoping we would hit that so I could talk about it, right? Essentially what the deal is that Rails and ActiveRecord wants to monitor which attributes can be set externally from outside the book class and which ones can only be manipulated internally from inside the book class. When we first created our book class, you might remember it added for us this line right here, adder accessible, this method call. All of the attributes that I had put in initially, right, author, ISBN, page count, publisher, so on and so forth, were all automatically added to that for me. By having them all listed, basically passed as arguments to that adder accessible method. What was happening was that ActiveRecord was saying it is okay for these values to be able to be set externally, right? Anybody basically who can get a value to it can set it, right? Can use update attribute, for example. So any of those different values in a book object could be set from the console, like we've been doing. They could be set from a controller. They could potentially be set from a different model, not the book model, but if there's some other model, they could go to the book class and say, hey, assign an author to this particular book. All of that stuff is allowed, right? In stock, the new attribute that we just added, okay, is not a part of this list. So what we can see here is basically ActiveRecord's reaction to us trying to assign a value, like with update attributes, like we were trying to do there, to a value that has not been listed as being public in a way, not being publicly accessible, right? If we want to be able to actually assign a value to in stock this way, then it's really just a simple matter of going in and putting in stock in here at the end of this list, right? That would be it, and then it would be allowed. We would have to reload, of course, right? But I'm not going to do that, right? If we wanted to get around that a different way, if we don't, for example, want to be able to just willy-nilly set true or false for in stock, but instead let's say it's something that should be determined only within the class itself, right? Maybe, for example, what I'd like to be able to do is instead of specifically saying update attribute in stock to true, I'd like to be able to say book dot in stock. Did I get a K in there? Yeah, my console's kind of messing up when I'm right there on the edge. Look at that. Okay. I'm going to get out of the console and go back in. Wait, here we go. That might have gotten things cleared. Let me try that again. No, don't do that. Maybe I'd like to be able to do something like this instead, where I can just declare a book as being in stock without having to specifically mess with the in stock attribute. Right? It becomes sort of more of an action in a way, instead of a value that I'm actually having to manipulate. If I wanted to be able to do something like that, then that in stock exclamation point would need to become a instance method, right? It would need to be a method that I could call specifically on a book. So over in my actual book class, I could add a new method called in stock. And then from here, I could say update attribute in stock to true. Now this time no self dot in front of the method call, because I don't want this to be a class method. I'm not saying all books are now in stock. I want to be able to take an individual book, an instance of a book, and say this book is in stock. So making it an instance method, not a class method. Right? Self, of course, still exists, so it's the same as if I said self.update attributes. So basically calling update attributes on whatever book the in stock method was being called on. So with that in there, I of course need to reload the console. Then, if I retrieve all my books, for each of those books, I call in stock exclamation point. Mass assignment security. Can't mass assign protected attributes in stock. I get the exact same thing I had before. Okay? But I'm doing it from inside the class itself. You think that would let us past it, right? But it doesn't, right? It's basically the fact, I think, that we're still going through update attributes. Okay? What if we just instead said self.inStock equals true? Right? We don't even actually need the self, right? And then we just said save. Oh, yeah, the underscore there. So I just tell the book that in stock is called on, set your in stock value to true, and then save yourself. Let's see, if I reload the console again and then try my loop, bingo. Maybe. No error. If I say book.all, Still didn't seem to work. Now what am I missing?
Usually we can stock the colon in front of it.
Say it again?
Like, they have to put the colon in front of it, doesn't give the value for it or the key for it.
Like that?
Yeah.
No, at this point it's basically just an attribute. It's like self dot in stock. Let me try putting the selfs in there and see if that makes any difference. Reload again. Rerun my loop. Oh, that time it worked. Apparently it was getting a little bit confused about exactly what in stock and save were. I wonder, based on the fact that it didn't look like any of those transactions actually happened, I think maybe here what it was actually doing was it was turning in stock into a new local variable. It wasn't actually recognizing it as the in stock attribute of the object itself. So the self in front of it, I think, is probably what cured it. Run into that sometimes. Yeah. But anyway, that seemed to get it working. Right? When I ran that same loop I had before, it now went through and updated in stock for all of my different books, and they're all showing up set. Now everything's in stock. And we have this nice little method we can use to say when a book is in stock. Right? Now, at the moment, there's not a whole lot of point, not a whole lot of difference between this or just saying that in stock is publicly accessible, putting it up there in our Adder accessible list. But the nice thing about potentially having it here as a method is that we could do things there with it. We could do things like if we call in stock, it could actually maybe go check and see if there's any books, or could maybe write out to a log saying books were restocked at this time, something like that. Lots of other possibilities. We could create a counterpart method to that as well if we wanted to. We could say sold out, sold out. That's the Oklahoma version. Our books are all sold out. Right? Sold out. We could say self.instock is set to false. Self.save. I really don't think I need the self there. Let me try it without it. Okay. Reload my console again. Let me retrieve an individual book. Let me say book.find book 3. Book with the ID of 3. Okay. If I then say b.sold out, looks like it did the update. If I take a look at book.all now, yep, that one book is now shown as not being in stock. Okay. And again, right, other behavior could go in there as well as just setting the value for in stock. Avoiding the use of update attributes let us get around having in stock in our Adder accessible statement. Right? More or less just trying to set up a situation where the primary way to interact with that particular attribute of the object is through custom methods that we create in the class itself. Right? Instead of opening it up wider where people could do other and less restricted things with that value. Yeah. What do you think? Do you have any questions? So easy, isn't it? Just brilliant. Okay. Want to do something real simple? Finish it up today? Yeah. Destroying books. How do we destroy things? How do we delete things from the database? Okay. What books do I have? Are there any books in here I don't like? Oh, I don't know. I love all my books so much. I hate to destroy any of them. But hey, what can you do? Right? Oh well, in my variable B, I already have a book, book 3, there in my variable B. If I wanted to destroy that book, wanted to actually get rid of it, B.destroy. Bam, it's gone. That's it. No more book 3. Now we've got books 1, 2, 4, and 5. Book 3 has been wiped from the database. It no longer exists. So that's it. Destroying something, basically wiping it out of the database, deleting that record from the database, is as simple as calling the destroy method. That's all you got to do. Okay. I think that's probably the best place for us to stop today. We're a few minutes earlier than I'd like, but I don't want to dig into this next section. We don't have nearly enough time for it. Right? Wednesday, next time. What I'm thinking is, I mentioned to you before that I wanted to try and get out of the console as quickly as we can. Well, we can't get out of it yet, but I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about how all this stuff we were just working with, retrieving active record objects based on criteria, based on ID, based on whatever, selecting, order, updating, creating, all of that fun stuff that we've been doing. I just wanted to talk about how that's eventually going to fit into the controllers, essentially, when we're setting up kind of a CRUD setup, how we would do the create, read, updates, and deletes fundamentally from a controller. So we'll start with that on Wednesday, and then we've got, what was the next thing? Oh yeah, validations. Then we need to go on and talk about how ActiveRecord does validations, which is pretty brilliant, pretty sparkly and brilliant. Sound good? Questions?
Yeah, actually I did.
Uh-huh.
When I have two different, like when I have the Hello World application and then also doing the ActiveRecord one.
Right.
How do I switch between the two with local hosts? Because aren't they on the same 3000 port?
You can start the server on whatever port you would like. I'm in my ActiveRecord example here. If I just say Rails S, it'll always start by default on port 3000. But if I wanted to start it on a different port, I can use a P-switch, do something like that.
And that'll assign that assignment to that port?
Right.
Okay.
Right. So you can have virtually as many different Rails apps running locally in development as you happen to want, so long as each one of them's on its own port. So I could have one running on port 3000, and then when I want that one, I go in my browser to localhost :3000. If I start this one on 3001, then when I go to my browser, I would just go to localhost 3001 and be able to keep them separate that way. Overall, it's a pretty good system. It's not too hard to deal with. The only place it sometimes gets tricky is if the different Rails apps that you're running actually need to refer to one another. You know, if the Rails app running on port 3000 actually needs to communicate in some way with the one running on 3001, then you have to be very careful when you start them that you always end up with the same port numbers assigned. But there are some nice gems, some nice system level setup type things that you can use to help get around that. My favorite is it's not exactly a server, is it? Kind of a server? It's this thing called POW, P-O-W. What it lets you do is that you can actually assign local development domain names, basically. So we could start this project up and we could have it call it ActiveRecordExample.dev. And then in the browser we would go to ActiveRecordExample.dev and it would pull it up. So it's a neat little toy.
How do you just, whenever you're making the app, you just call it Rails new ActiveRecordExample.dev?
No, you don't even have to. You would just create the app the same way we did here. Just give it whatever name you want to give it. And then when you start it and configure it through POW, at that point you would decide what its actual local domain name would be. Right? And it's only local. It's not going to publish it to the web or anything. It's just for testing on your own machine. Okay. POW. POW.cx. Right? Knock out Rails and Rack apps like a superhero. Prevails over the forces of evil. No maintenance required. Multiple rubies. There you go. There's your command to install it. On a Mac. On Windows, I don't know if it's an option. Have to Google around for that. But here's basically what you get is the ability to access your app locally through the app's name.dev. I don't use it because it interferes with Apache. So when I'm teaching PHP at the same time and I need to have Apache and PHP set up, they fight with each other and I've never found a good way to keep them separate. So it seems like every summer I put POW on and use it, and then every time spring or fall comes around and I've got PHP classes again, I have to take it back off.
Can you disable gems?
You can
uninstall them, but just disable them?
I don't know that you can. I think you have to uninstall them essentially.
You just uninstall gen POW?
Yeah, basically. It's not exactly a gem. Not entirely. It's actually a set of scripts that get installed, as I recall. It's been a while since I played with it. But there you go. All right. Let's see.